Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author, bringing you a series of interviews with some amazing sculptors who inspire me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs accompanying the interview, the episode show notes, and get a free novel from sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello, Sculpture Vultures, and welcome to this very special end-of-year episode. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I'm having a chat with a very special guest about some topics close to our heart around sculpture that have come up for us in 2021. So after a little catch up, we get into the topics like the rights and wrongs of the retain and explain policy around historic monuments, the need for standards around commissioning sculpture, issues about copyright, and when to be and not to be ballsy when dealing with contracts. And if you think all that sounds a little bit deep for you on New Year's, don't fear, because it's all going to be accompanied by some gin, at least in my glass. So you'll have to excuse me if mid-episode I break into song. Now, who can it be, my special guest? Have I built up enough anticipation? I'm not sure. I think we need a drum roll. It's the fabulous, the wonderful Hazel Reeves, who is particularly a fitting guest for this show because she was the very first person to be interviewed on the podcast and has recently won the Public Statues and Sculpture Association Marsh Award for Excellence in Public Sculpture. Hazel, how the devil are you?
I missed your dulcet tones.
Oh, well, I'm always available on the podcast if you'd like to listen to them. Oh, no. Tell us a little bit about what's been going on with you, because you have had an incredibly exciting year.
I have. It's been really full on and a little bit overwhelming, a sort of a huge year of sort of artistic growth.
Tell us about the sculpture you're working on at the moment, the commission.
I'm working on a statue of Elizabeth Wolstenholme Elmy, a real kick-ass feminist from the 1800s who sort of overlapped with the Pankhurst, so Emmeline and her daughters, and worked with them to set up the Women's Social Political Union. And she did an incredible amount, even before the Pankhurst, about extending women's rights. So she was a real firecracker. She was the first paid lobbyist of the women's movement. And she was only like 4'10", we think. So it's been a lovely size to work on. But somehow, even though it's small, it still takes us much time.
Did you have much to work with?
So there are a few photos, including when she was older, perhaps in her late 70s, early 80s. So I've done her as an older woman, probably sort of in her sort of earlier 70s, I think. And it's been, a real lovely one to do. And sort of that, sort of trying to instill her spirit, it's been a real...
Right up your street, really.
Trying to get her animated and get across. And I really love the fact that she's life-size and she's going straight into the high street in Congleton. And so people will be able to stand next to her and see, despite her being tiny in stature, she was such a powerful and an inspiring woman.
Firecracker.
So I've been working, a real firecracker. So I've been working at Bronze Age London on the wax in the last couple of weeks. And so that's going into shell as we speak.
Gosh, and when is that revealed?
Revealed on International Women's Day, so the 8th of March next year.
Brilliant. And then what about this fantastic award? What about the PSSA Excellence in Public Sculpture, isn't it?
That's right, yes. Had my Sir Nigel Gresley and the Cracker Packers both have been nominated in previous years, but never been shortlisted. So when I was told I'd been shortlisted, I was just so excited just to be shortlisted and to have my name alongside the others. So, Bryony Marshall, Mark Richards, Philida Barlow, Thomas J. Price, Rachel Whiteread. I mean, wow, to be in the same sentence, in the same breath as them was just amazing. And so I got an email from Joanna Barnes from the PSSA saying, could we chat about the awards ceremony, and for some reason I thought that maybe she's ringing to tell me that 6 shortlisted artists were too many and she was going to have to ask me to step
Oh,
down.
that's awful that you really thought that she was going to say,
I know. And so when she did say, well, actually, I've got some news for you, Hazel, you've actually won this category, I just kept on going, no, are you sure?
Oh, the public have loved it. I mean, all the different, manifestations of dressing her up, and just, it really has been something that's had a life of its own.
You hope for it, but you can't dictate it. You can't plan it. It either happens or it doesn't. And everything has come together. And I think the activist community in Manchester really warmed the whole idea of it being Emmeline Pankhurst and it being there with the meeting circle around her, and the whole idea of it being really dedicated to the current day activists. So they have used it, and as you've seen her dressed up to highlight issues around climate change, domestic violence, sea levels rising.
She just seems to fit perfectly with all these kind of themes that, are so topical at the moment.
Yeah, and it's sort of the legacy, and it links so strongly with the radical legacy of Manchester.
Yeah. Oh, and so have you just been walking around with a permanent smile on your face?
I've been trying to be modest and magnanimous about it all. But I'm finding it really hard because I'm just so excited and still can't believe it because, compared to the other artists the work is just phenomenal.
It's the right decision, absolutely.
So how's your year been?
Oh, we've had a great year. So exciting in so many ways. Opened the year quite early on in the season with the restoration of Alexandra of Tunis, and I got to interview James Butler, who for me is just, such a legend, because his work is incredible. And when you look through what statues he's actually created, it's one of those ones that you every one of them you're like, oh, it's even better than the one before. And so I felt I was really sort of privileged, I felt, for us to be able to sort of start the year that way with such a great sculpture.
Wow.
And also in an incredible setting. So the Barrack, it's just near the Buckingham Palace, but it's one of those places that there's just helicopters dropping in and out all over the place, and people about to shoot you, it seems, because they're marching through with these enormous guns. So actually, doing the sculpture, you're distracted all the time, and normally you're distracted maybe by the public talking to you in most of our projects, but this wasn't really that, because at the time, at the early part of the year, there was a lot of lockdown and things, so it was so quiet, but there was just so much going on in the barracks, and just in the middle of central London, you just don't really expect it to be like that. So yeah, that was a great one to start the year with, and we've just had really diverse projects. Been working at down in the city on fantastic Christina Iglesias sculptures, which are incredible and sort of really difficult conservation wise, and then having done the Kindertransport sculpture later in the year, just really, I've probably missed out a whole load of other ones that we've done that I should have mentioned, but just kind of lovely, all of them unique in their way. I love having a difficult conservation problem, because those are the ones that I feed off like mad, because you have to knuckle down to the research and you discover things that even though you think you know them, you actually don't. You have to go deeper and look, because that specific context of that problem will be unique to that area. Then also, war memorials, completely different. Kindertransport, you almost want to cry when you're restoring it, because it's so important and such a sad history, and yet sad but also happy, and it's all mixed up. So yeah, we've had a great year, and I feel very lucky that we've been able to carry on working you know, when there's still so much of the complications of illness around and things like that that have, you know, made other people's work so difficult.
But I mean, what is great is how much you just love your work and how it comes through the way that you talk about it, which makes it such a privilege to have you clean, you know, for example, our Emmeline, because you know it's in very safe hands, somebody that's going to sort of lovingly clean it and restore it. It makes a real difference, actually. I leave her in St. Peter's Square and sort of almost feel like I've abandoned her. But when you've gone and you've cleaned her, it sort of feels as that connection again.
Yeah, as if you're, you know, you're keeping an eye on her through someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the really nice part of being a conservator that works with, you know, living artists, is that thing of being able to sort of to feed back to the artist and say, you know, it's okay, it's doing fine, and like, you know, I've nagged so and so because they need to, you know, they've forgotten about it, and you know, you have to kind of be that person who is badgering people and making sure things are right, and you know, while you, the artist, is getting on with the next project.
Yeah.
But actually, it was earlier in the year that I felt like there was a really important aspect to sculpture that came out, and that was the new regulations about retaining and explaining historic monuments. Even people that are involved and working in sculpture are very split about how they feel about public monuments of a certain ilk that have some seriously questionable backgrounds, no longer really represent what we want to show in society. And this idea that the government have come forward with and saying, actually, we're not going to take them all down. What we're going to do is set them in context. For me, I felt like that was the right decision. There was a lot of expressions of dissent, and there's still quite a lot of people saying, well, actually, this shouldn't be so. Really, they should just be boxed up and not out there anymore. And I can see their point, but for me, that was, I think, the right decision was come to, actually.
That's interesting. I found somebody writing about this, describing three different types of responses. So one was the antagonistic, the sort of, right, the only option is to pull these things down.
Yeah.
Then there was the agonistic, the sort of, oh, we must contextualize this.
Yeah.
And then there was the sort of the conservation. This must be kept at all costs. Otherwise, it's erasing stories. And I sort of quite like that, because I sort of think about myself and how do I feel? Where do I fit into those three categories? And I think I'm generally an agonistic person, sort of like, oh, agonize over things. Also, I don't know how you felt when you saw the Colston statue tossed into those docks. I actually felt a real visceral sense of how powerful that would have been. Oh, that felt for me at that point, even though I'm a sculptor, the symbolism of it.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I would bring in the idea that a statue is only as relevant as today. So it doesn't have to stay there. If it becomes irrelevant for whatever reason, then it doesn't have to stay in the same place. It can be moved. It can go into a museum. So my idea of retaining doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be there on the streets, where it might be something which is really, I suppose, how to put it, depends who you are as to how powerfully abhorrent something will be. And we need to have to take into account people's feelings on these statues, and if they reinforce very prejudicial views or discourses and narratives. And I think we do have to take that in account. I feel we have to have a discussion with local people about how they feel about these statues. I think there's also another area which people tend to forget about, is that there's also another option, a fourth option, which is actually to bring in more statues so that more of our communities in our cities and towns are represented in statuary. And I think that's is one of the issues. It's not the solution necessarily, just to put thousands more statues out there, But I think as a figurative sculptor, that would be part of my solution.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent idea. Yeah.
Statues. So with my particular area, it tends to be statues of women, but it's also statues of people of colour, of disabled people and so on. You know, we need to see ourselves on the streets. And that's why when I was young, I never noticed statues because they didn't speak to me, because I didn't see myself there. I didn't see statues of women. So I think it's been a really interesting one. And I think I'm glad the sort of conversations have started up around it.
But also, one of the comments I heard, I think it was Nick Hornby, he was saying that actually there's no point in putting plaques alongside these statues because statues are supposed to be seen from a distance. And people often are not really concentrating, that they're sort of in the background of your life as you're scuttling past them. And so there's no point in putting them in context because people don't view public sculpture in context. So that was his argument against having this retain, explain policy, because and I think actually he's got a point, right?
Yeah. So I think, and often these statues, these older statues, which are more problematic perhaps, at the time it was really trying to elevate these people, often very powerful, rich, old white men, usually elevating above the people on these huge plinths. And so they wanted to be seen and be imposing from a distance. And yes, people don't necessarily come up close to see what's going on. I think there has been some interesting creative responses, which I don't know how many have actually come to life. Many of them at an idea stage of to have something quite significant and sizable near to these problematic statues, which tell the untold stories, which creatively reinsert other ideas and other peoples and other voices and other stories alongside it.
Oh, I love that. That's brilliant. You would be the ideal person for that because you do dabble in well, not dabble actually, much more than dabble in sort of more interpretive performance work that you do.
That's sort of I suppose I've come to call it my sculptural choreography.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't quite think of the word for it there, but you know, using performance as a kind of access into sculpture is also something interesting and could totally be done.
Yes, and I think there's a very interesting one actually. In the Roads Must Fall protests in Cape Town in, I think it was 2015, there was a 4-hour performance which was all about bringing down that statue of Rhodes there. And I think it culminated in the fall of the statue itself. So that was really interesting that performance was brought into that. And I guess the sculptural choreography work that I do is less directly connected to physical sculpture. And it's more this idea that does sculpture stop with materials, or can it be about movement? Can it be about bodies? And for me, sculpture is so visceral that in fact, for me, moving out of just the physical clay or the physical bronze is where I feel I want to be moving more, perhaps.
Oh, don't move out of the clay. Please don't move out of the clay.
I don't think I would ever. I mean, I think there's something that compels me to want to tell these stories, but very particular stories that I feel are untold.
But I think that's a brilliant layering of art as well, isn't it? That we could have these other art forms around these existing ones, and that art form comes out of kind of the history of that object and how society sees it having changed. Oh, I think that's great. I don't know if they'll do it. I don't know if they've got the budget for it, but, you know, I love the idea of it. Actually, going back to the PSSA, they put a very good point forward, which was that they were saying one of the reasons they didn't think we should be tearing these sculptures down is because not only is it an artist's work as well as a representation of a person, but also the locations that a lot of these sculptures have been put in are original. So these sculptures were set against buildings and in spaces that were, very carefully considered, and that by removing them, you are actually affecting everything around them, and that people are not seeing spaces as they were originally created in that particular period. I thought that had relevance as well, actually.
I hadn't thought of that, although I think still the politics of who we're celebrating would overcome
It would,
that for
but
me.
we have so little original. I'm going to say London here, but any city really. But we have so few spaces that are still seen as they originally were, that the idea that we'll have even less of them, it's a consideration. Any other things that have come up for you this year in sculpture?
I've got some bugbears which sort of have started to, you've got something that itches a little bit and you sort of scratch it a bit and you realise actually you're a bit annoyed about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
for me that usually comes out in the situation where I think I'm absolutely fine about something, and then I start yelling about it.
yeah. And I think for me this year, the excitement in more projects around developing statues of women to have on our streets has been really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to
On
be
the other
gaining
hand,
ground there, I think.
I mean, there's a huge amount of ground to gain.
Yes,
But
there
yes,
is.
there is progress. However, I haven't done in-depth research on this, but my sense is that many of these projects have much lower commissioning budgets. And it makes me think what this says about how we value the women that we're depicting, the subjects of the statues, and with perhaps women sculptors getting more of a look in these days, what does it say about how we value women sculptors? So for me, I think there is an issue more generally about commissioning and how we do it, who does it, how much time is it ethical to ask the sculptors to put in unpaid into these projects before they're shortlisted, once they're shortlisted, and once they're actually commissioned. And I think this is a real issue. So one is on the sort of the gender side. We know that the gender pay gap in the art world in the UK is meant to be about 80%. And if you look at some of the budgets for statues of women, there could be something similar, a similar sort of gap in how much the project is going to be commissioned for.
But I mean, do
And
they surely they don't know the gender of the sculptor before they
no, but I think
finalise the commission?
no, but I think it's more that it could be a fact of we just don't value women enough. Maybe it's harder to raise funds for statues of women. But at this point, when at least women sculptors are starting to get a look in, they're not necessarily going to get the piece, but maybe there's more of a chance than in previous times when it was always, women can't sculpt, therefore it will always have to be a man. So we've sort of pushed that aside. And my feeling is that these statues of women, where women perhaps have got a better chance of getting a look in, they're going to end up getting paid or putting a huge amount of unpaid work into the project. So I think we need to have some sort of standards around commissioning. So when there are inexperienced people very excited about getting a statue of a certain person on their streets, that there's a body they can go to where there's some clear commissioning guidelines, which include things like what is it acceptable to ask an artist to do before you give them any money.
Yeah.
So I think that a number of figurative sculptors out there will really sort of understand that. And even sometimes when the potential clients are trying hard, they perhaps don't have anybody that really a sculptor as part of their selection committee, or anybody that would understand whether a proposal is realistic in terms of the remit. You know, is it realistic on that budget to do a sculpture which is twice life size? Probably not. But if you don't have the expertise on the commissioning body, then how do you select from these proposals? So that's enough of me moaning.
Yeah, no, but I think actually you bring up some brilliant points and things that I've kind of touched on in my own work as well. Just that I think what you're maybe, if I'm right, is saying is actually two different elements. One is whether sculptures of women have the same budget as maybe sculptures of men, maybe less about the gender of the sculptor in the end, because we don't know who will be selected, but that maybe these important women that need to be commemorated have, you know, a slightly lesser budget. And I think back to years ago I was working on the suffragette scroll, which was probably the only monument to the suffragettes not that long ago. It was one of the only ones in London anyway. Yeah. And I remember contacting the artist who unfortunately I think had Alzheimer's at the time, but his wife spoke to me and I was saying, why is it made of resin? Why is it cold cast resin rather than bronze? This is such an important monument to women. Yeah. And she was saying, there was no money. No one wanted to fund this monument. And you're like, this is in Victoria. It's in, you know, it's the only monument at the time to the suffragettes. How on earth can there have been no budget at all? And she was just like, there was nothing. No one wanted to pay a penny towards it. So they couldn't even afford to get it made in a permanent material. So, you know, we're conserving all the seams and everything because all of, you know, over time, polymers degrade horribly outdoors and they start to fray and all sorts of things. And you're like trying to patch up something that just isn't a permanent solution and to a cause that was, you know, how can it not have been permanent in history? So that seems to be, it's a pervading problem, but this idea maybe that there's even a pay gap with women.
There's a sculpture budget gap.
There's a sculpture budget gap somehow with gender, which is bizarre. But then also
there's also not to say that there aren't projects. So, you know, I've been lucky with my project. And I do understand that it's really hard to raise funds, but I think it's harder to raise funds if the subject of a statue is a woman, just because of the way women are valued more generally. So yeah. It sort of is not necessarily anybody's fault other than society's fault.
Yeah, other than society and history. Yeah, absolutely. Which there's no one to go to with that problem. It's kind of, we've got to just sort it out.
So, but we still have to have something which doesn't end up with the sculptor subsidising the statue.
Yeah. So then there's this other aspect, which is this lack of, like you called it, like a commissioning body. There is an outline of what is reasonable and practical. And actually what I'm coming up against is artists not being legal expertise either of what is reasonably being asked of them. So then they're coming to the point where they have to sign contracts about their sculptures, and actually they're being asked to do to sign things that really they shouldn't be being asked to sign, but there's nobody anywhere that is able to say, well, yeah, that's perfectly reasonable to sign, or say actually that you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I pay for somebody to give me advice. So I have somebody who's like an arts mentor who's done a lot of commissioning.
Yeah.
And she will read through contracts. She's not a legal expert, but she knows what is reasonable.
Yeah.
And things, often you're asked to sign away your copyright, which you must not do.
No, don't do it.
It's not necessarily because they're trying to exploit you. It's because they don't know what's reasonable and what's ethical. And maybe they're using legal people who don't know about artists and copyright. So yes, as an artist, I have to be very wary about what I sign. And on the whole, often clients, you know, I will write the contract and we'll, you know, discuss the details until we get something that we're all happy with. And then that works out. But you're right. I mean, in terms of, we've got the PSSA, who I think are sort of, interested in perhaps stepping up in terms of advice in conjunction to others. So ICSIA, I think they've sort of resurrected themselves, and they did provide some interesting commissioning guidelines several years back, which I guess needs to be updated. But that was the first time I saw anything about, if you're putting out a call for artists, you cannot ask them for detailed sketches or anything before you actually pay them. And of course now there's this burgeoning idea that, of course, we should go to the public, and all the design should go to the public, and there should be maquettes. And actually this incredibly long process which takes up a lot of artists' time. And I think people perhaps don't get that actually artists are usually freelancers, and so they don't get paid when they're not working. So this is all, it's not like being in a salaried job and you're going in for a pitching business, you and colleagues, and you don't get it. It's like, oh, we haven't got it, but you're still getting your salary paid. Whereas actually if you're an artist and you put a lot of work into a commission, you don't get it, then you don't get any money.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I was just going back to copyright. I was recently asked to write a chapter for a very important publisher who is going to be making money. Let's no two ways about it. But they asked me to sign copyright. Also, not only did they want my world rights in every language of every medium that the article could be written, they also wanted me to sign away the rights mediums not yet to be invented. I mean, I'm sorry. No. Mediums not yet to be invented. I have no idea. How long ago was it? We didn't even have cryptocurrency, and there were things that just didn't, NFTs, there were things that weren't in existence, and suddenly people are making zillions of pounds out of, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not even going to give you world rights unless there has to be substantial money there to be able to sign that away. I just people really will ask the world, and all I can say is, in general, when you're signing things, just be very specific about what you're giving away, and certainly don't sign things that say mediums that are not yet invented.
Yeah, that does sound absolutely
I was flabbergasted at that, and they were rude enough to say to me things like, well all the other authors have signed it, and I was like, well, I'm not signing it, sorry.
Oh, that's a favourite one, isn't it? Well, everyone's fine.
Everyone else is fine with it.
You're just being difficult, and if there's any you slightly question yourself, but then it's that thing sort of, you have to, I think with being a sculptor or being an artist, you have to have quite clear sense of self, sense of what your worth is.
Yeah.
In order to survive and to be able to function as a full-time artist.
Yeah,
that's incredibly important, and you only build that up over time. To be able to say, actually, to a council, I've had council send me sort of 40-page contracts with things where I'm having penalties for not delivering on time.
Oh yeah, I hate those.
It's all dependent on whether the council has been able to do its bit, but they don't have a penalty if they
if they're late. Yeah.
And so it's actually to have the confidence to say, actually, these are the things that need to be changed because I'm not going to sign up to them. And normally they'll come back and go, oh, okay, we hadn't really thought about that, because we don't normally deal with artists.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but it doesn't mean to say you have to be a bit savvy about it and sort of get in some advice.
I've kind of definitely been happier about pushing back. I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of councils all the time, and I do get completely unreasonable things, but as you say, every time I have pushed back, they've gone, oh, that's fine, don't worry about it, and they've taken it out of the contract. Whereas I don't know whether it's, again, I don't know whether I definitely felt like, as a younger woman in running a creative business, I couldn't say, oh, actually, that's completely outrageous. I don't know whether it's not being trained that it's all right to be quite ballsy about these things.
Yeah, I think it's the way you say things, isn't it? So
Yeah,
the way you are in the world as a person, it's not my style to go and say to people, that's absolutely outrageous. How dare you send me a contract like that? I'm absolutely insulted. I'm going to go back and try and explain why it's not going to work for me. And this is another way forward. So I think it's having the confidence to do that and do it in a way which isn't sort of aggressive. And you come to a quicker and better solution that way.
yeah. I mean, it is a difficult thing about how much you do for free in any creative business. But then I remember, I think in terms of sculpture commissions, Andrew, when Simcock, when I was talking to him on the interview, he was talking about how valuable having something like the public involved in a commission was, because it kind of gave you a barometer of how people felt about the sculpture. He was talking in terms of the Princess Diana sculpture this year, the Ian Rank Broadley statue, and he was saying he felt like if they'd had a public vote on that, that maybe a different design would have been selected.
It's a weird thing. At the moment in the middle of a public vote for the Agatha Christie statue for Torquay.
Oh yes, I voted on that. I loved that sculpture.
Which is, I just adore Agatha Christie. My studio, especially when I'm working on statues late at night, then it's Agatha Christie's characters that accompany me in the studio, like Poirot and Miss Marple and Mr. Quinn. And I can listen to them over and over again. And because I'm only listening partly because I'm focusing on sculpting, so I can listen to them over and over again. And they're really soothing. And I love the dialogue that I hear. But I can listen to them again because I can never remember who the murderer is.
Yeah.
It is such an exhausting process of doing a figurative statue, old school way. And I couldn't get out of bed to do it for somebody I didn't admire or was a huge inspiration to me. It's just not worth it. So I'm not somebody who would just go for anything. It has to be something I really, really want to do.
Do you see that? Do you think the value of the public vote is enough in the process?
That's a difficult one. I think with the Agatha Christie one, it's solely on the public vote, which is actually quite unusual. The Emmeline Pankhurst one was the public vote input into the selection panel's decision. And luckily I won the public vote and I was the unanimous choice of the selection panel. So that all sort of worked quite neatly. It doesn't all, necessarily always work like that. I think there's one issue, I think, on how, if you're going to go to the public with ideas or maquettes, then I think you need to have scrutinized your artists very carefully so that what they're proposing is realistic within the budget.
Yeah.
And you're sure that they can deliver a quality, particularly if it's a figurative piece, that they have got the skills, they do know their anatomy, that they're going to be able to deliver a quality project. And I think often in those commissioning bodies, they don't have somebody that can assess the quality, neither can they assess whether it's realistic, because often artists want to perhaps overpromise because they want to be chosen.
Yeah, of course.
Somebody that actually says, well, they've offered to do it double life size, but on that small budget, there's no way they can deliver it. They'll only be coming back to us, 3 months down the road saying, oh, actually, we can't do it.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, so you need to have done a really tight selection process before anything goes to the public. And I think you need to pay artists before any ideas go to the public. They need to be paid for the detailed sketches or maquettes and so on. So I think
the early work.
I think it's far too much. The risk is taken on by the artists, and I think that isn't fair. The Agatha Christie one, we do get paid for doing these design ideas, our little videos. We do have a small payment for that, and obviously most projects, if you have to do a maquette, you're paid for that. But nowadays, with the cost of foundries going up, actually the amount you get paid might not even cover your foundry costs, let alone, and no contribution to your time. So I think we really do need some, these organisations working together, as I said, PSSA, ICSIA, maybe the Royal Society of Sculptors, maybe the Society of Portrait Sculptors, can come together with artists and sculptors and actually sort of perhaps get some principles down.
Our own Institute of Conservation, they are excellent at that. I mean, our field wasn't really regulated before. It was all sort of, just like little workshops and studios around. And basically they have brought the museum world and the sort of private practice world together, and they've tried to unite the standard so that, and to ensure that there isn't damage to public sculpture or art, or there's every field, ethnography and textiles and everything that's covered. But what they did is they kind of, I think they modelled themselves on another institute that had done it and make something work so that we are a professional body and that our contracts are quite well established and our standards are.
Yeah, well, that's really encouraging. And I feel for these sort of small organisations, it takes a huge amount of motivation and time and money to get these sort of statue projects up and running, and all the work that's required to get support and raise the funds and so on. And there's no reason why they should be experts on public sculpture.
Yeah.
Or know of the best way to actually run a selection process.
Yeah.
So I think it's more that they need help rather than me moaning that they're not getting it right. It's just, if we can provide some guidelines, it would make their life a lot easier. And then the sculptors going for it can more easily assess the risk, what they've got to lose if they're going to spend a lot of time on this, or what they have to gain. And I think it would help both sculptors, and I think it would help the commissioning organisations as well.
Oh, Hazel, so any goals for next year? Is there anything left to accomplish?
I think stop moaning, actually. Sorry, you've got, and I'm not even drinking gin.
Well, could you, all the way through, I've been slightly aware that my ice is clinking in my glass. So I am drinking
third
gin.
One. For next year, it'd be lovely to get out and about and see more things. I'm terrible. I'm one of these people that I'm constantly in a process of planning what I'm going to be doing, questioning who I am as an artist. It's ongoing. And so I don't tend to have sort of annual goals so much. It's just always thinking what I want to be doing next. How could I be, learning and stretching myself and developing my artistic practice. So it's sort of constant, incessant, but that makes it exciting. And so for me, in the coming year, this whole multidisciplinary, perhaps much more collaboration I'm looking for, alongside telling stories in bronze, of course, but really developing some of that, linking sound and movement, that sort of idea of sort of sculptural choreography. I really like to develop that in collaboration, because it's really exciting what we managed to achieve this year with the Sculptural Murmurings project, but also bringing in the work I've been doing at NEP and the field recordings and the bird song. I think there's so much potential for that in the coming year.
Your New Year's resolutions?
Resolutions for next year is to at least have one day off a week.
Oh, I know. I fantasize about retreats, as if that's something that, you could go away on a retreat for 3 days. I'm like, absolutely impossible. I can hardly get 3 minutes off, let alone 3 days.
There is an element of us creating around ourselves and being inspired to work really hard and wanting to get and do things as well as we can.
And all of the projects are important. That's the point, is there is nothing that I would trade off. So it's not like I could say, oh, well, yeah, it'd be easy to cull such and such. None of it would be easy because I love it all. We'll have to report back in and find out, did we manage to be less mad next year? I doubt it.
No, but we do love what we do.
Please support the show in one of 3 ways. By buying one of my novels. You're going to love them. They're all about sculpture. Or by rating the show on any of the apps that you listen to. And the final way that you can help me out is by telling someone about the show. Don't think it's unimportant to do it that way. It's so important, and I really appreciate it. If you're looking for a new book, please consider one of my novels about the dark side of the art world, where sculpture is always at the heart of the story. You can get them on the show website, on the usual online retailers, or even better, keep your local library alive, ask for them in there. Thank you for joining me today. Sculpture Vulture has been brought to you by Antique Bronze.